So after that we'll drop back down into Windermere and then on to Kendal, or Oxenholme to be more accurate. So that's our tour today, and like I say, it's a fairly compact tour of the Lake District, is the Ten Lakes tour. But going back to that railway arriving in 1847, it was all, like I say, about bringing wealth here, particularly wealthy industrialists. And one of the families who came here was the Howards from Manchester. They were mill owners, and they were a very, very wealthy family. They built themselves a holiday home. They called it the Holiday Cottage, and this was built in 1900. And what you're about to see is now called the Langdale Chase. It's one of the finer hotels in the Lake District. But like I said, this was built for a family of just 6 people back in 1900. If you compare it with somewhere like here, which is Waterhead, well, Waterhead has had a settlement here since 79 AD. And we know that because there is an old Roman fort called Galava. It was built by a gentleman called Julius Agricolae. He was the governor of Britannia, and he was on a campaign to push the boundaries of the Roman Empire farther north. And the fort used to sit out to our left hand side. You can see some signs in the field here. This is where the old Roman fort used to sit. Now Julius wasn't a very clever man, because he turned around to his engineers and he said, "Build me a fort out of wood." So they did, and it rotted, because that's what happens to wood, of course, close to a lake and on boggy ground. And it wasn't until 122 AD that another Roman came along, a gentleman called Hadrian. Emperor Hadrian, of course, much more famous for having built Hadrian's Wall at the north of England, where the boundary with Scotland was. And he ordered it rebuilt out of stone, and it stood there until the fall of the Roman Empire in the 5th century. And once it had fallen and all the soldiers had left, and there were over 500 soldiers garrisoned at that fort, but once they'd all left, the locals removed all the stone because it was too good to waste. And that is what happened to an awful lot of Roman buildings. An awful lot of them were just dismantled, and the stones were used elsewhere. And it's why it's just the foundations of the original fort that's left here at Galava. But of course there would have been a village servicing that fort right up from that time to places in the Lake District. Ambleside, well, it's like so many names here in the Lake District, it has a meaning. It's going to be a little bit difficult to see because of the rain that's coming down, to be honest with you. But Ambleside means summer grazing or summer meadow. And it's all about the fell that's right in front of us. Once we go around the corner, hopefully you'll be able to see this. But the fell right in front of us, the word fell, by the way, it's Norse again. It comes from the word fiel, and fiel means mountain. So that's where the words fell. I can't stop here, unfortunately, because of the double yellow lines in the traffic, but like I said, lovely little building. Now, you might wonder to yourself, why would you build a house like that? Well, there's a couple of stories, but before I tell you, I'll just mention that Langdale Chase, that was built for just 6 people, well, that at one time had 8 people living in it. Mum, Dad, and 6 children. That would have been chaos. But here we go. This car park to our left is part of the story, because at one time that was an apple orchard, and they wanted to store the apples, and they figured out that if they built a house on a bridge, the stream running underneath would draw heat from the building, and once the heat had been drawn from the building, then it would be perfect for storing apples. And if you go in there on a warm day, but if you're ever here in spring, do come and have a look at it. It really is wonderful. Out to your left hand side, Rydal Water, one of 3 lakes in the Lake District known as Skaters Lakes. And the reason they were called that is during the very, very cold winters, especially during Victorian times, when we went through a period known as the Mini Ice Age. Well, these 3 lakes Rydal Water, Grasmere and Brothers Water would all freeze over. And once they'd frozen solid, then the locals would go out there skating. And that's where they got the name from, the Skaters Lakes.
Skaters Lake.
But Rydal and Grasmere, like I said, they are very, very shallow lakes. But the other thing about them is you go back farther in time, you go back about 400 years, the shores of these two lakes were actually patrolled by marauding packs of wolves. And you might be able to see and make out two islands out there. They're called Big Island and Little Island. And a farmer, like I say, a long time ago decided that his livestock were in danger and they would be much safer if he got them onto those islands. He didn't want them to be attacked or killed by the wolves that patrolled these fells. So the only way he had to get his livestock there was to take them out in a little rowing boat, one by one. Took him all day to do it. So after his day he was completely tired out, but he said he had the best night's sleep of his life that night. All because he knew all his livestock was safe on the islands. Because the belief was that you had to be buried in consecrated ground. Now Ambleside didn't have any, so the nearest was at St Oswald's Church in Grasmere. So anybody who had passed away would be carried along here by their relatives, and they were all carried because the vast majority of the people were local farmers, and they weren't very wealthy people. And to hire a hearse would have been expensive, so the family would act as pallbearers and carry them along this route. And they had a couple of beliefs when they were carrying the coffin. The first one was that the coffin had to be carried feet first, and that's still very much done in Christian burials today. You'll often see the pallbearers carrying the coffin feet first. And the reason was simple. They believed if the coffin was dropped, then the person inside, the soul of the person, will be pointing towards the churchyard, and they will be able to get sanctuary as they went along. There is a car behind me, so this is going to be a little bit more awkward, but I'm just trying to get this car to come past us. Oh, come on, you plenty of room. Just so as we can actually just take in this little bit of a view of Grasmere at the moment. Like I say, that's the second of the Skaters Lakes. Now just as we get to the bottom of the hill, on our right hand side is Dove Cottage. I'll go past nice and slowly. Unfortunately we can't actually stop here because we've had complaints from the Wordsworth Trust saying don't stop your buses outside Dove Cottage, so unfortunately we do have to just go slowly past. But you have a quick look at Dove Cottage. This is where William Wordsworth lived with his family for 9 years. And it's where he wrote Daffodils. I wandered lonely as a cloud. I'm sure you've heard the poem at some point. But it was all wrote here at Dove Cottage. The inspiration for it came from somewhere else. That was from Ullswater. But we'll see that place a little bit later. Well, like I said, this is Little Dove Cottage. The window on the right hand side, well, that would have been William Wordsworth's study. And Dove Cottage was actually a pub. So it used to be a public house, and it was called the Dove, and that's how it got its name of Dove Cottage. The buildings to our right, well, this is the Wordsworth Museum, and this is where the vast majority of William Wordsworth's manuscripts are actually kept. They're in very, very carefully controlled conditions, carefully controlled for temperature. There was another person who was famous here, and that's a lady called Sarah Nelson. And Sarah Nelson opened a shop in 1854, and she sold one thing. It was gingerbread, and it's become known as Grasmere gingerbread, a very unique type. It's a crispy base with a chewy centre and an oaty crumbly top, and a wonderful ginger flavour. And when the shop was opened in 1854, it was opened in the old schoolhouse. That schoolhouse was where William Wordsworth and Mary, his wife, used to teach the local children. And it sits in the grounds of St Oswald's Church. This is one of the oldest Christian sites in the Lake District. dates back to at least 642 AD. Now what we're just going to do is just scoot around the village, and then we're going to park in the garden centre. But this is Sarah Nelson's Grasmere gingerbread. To find the graves, just go through where that queue is at the moment, you'll side, and that's because the here in the right hand side. These little sheep, these are herdwicks, and what you can see this one doing on the right there, actually right up against the wall, that's because of the weather. Now if you try and remember that image of a sheep standing close to a wall, I'll tell you much more about that later in the day, but you've actually seen them do it. They use the walls as a shelter against the worst of the rain. Anyway, just coming back to villagers brewing their own beers. We're going back to that in the Lake District because we have more microbreweries here per square mile than anywhere else in Britain. And it's all about the water. The water here is so pure and so soft. It is perfect for making beers. And there's many microbreweries, and if you're a fan of real ale, well, you could do a tour of the Lake District, and I don't think you'd ever get to every single microbrewery. There are so many of them, but one or two worth trying. There's the White Ings, which is the Windermere Brewing Company. That's fairly close to Windermere, and for you guys staying in Kendal, if you want to try anything like that, there's the Hawkshead Brewery at Staveley. They're all classed as microbreweries. But this is our climb up Dunmail Raise. Now Raise means a burial site. But before we get there, we're just going to get a quick glimpse of England's smallest Grade 1 listed building. If you're not familiar with the grading system, Grade 1 means it must be kept in perfect condition inside and out. And it's just on our right hand side as we go through. It isn't the farmhouse. Mound of Stones is the royal burial site of King Dunmail. Now just in front of us is the Thirlmere Valley, but before we enter it, keep your eye up to your right hand side, follow the tree. There you go, you should be just seeing it now. At one time, the Thirlmere Valley had two different lakes in it, Thirlmere and Withburn Water. But at the end of the 1800s, the city of Manchester was struggling for a supply of fresh water. The taps were continuously running dry in summer, and they started to hunt for a new water supply, and they selected this valley. They decided that Thirlmere would be the perfect place for a reservoir. So they bought up as much of the land as they possibly could, and once they'd done that, they then announced their intentions to raise the level of the lake by 10 feet, or 3 metres. They actually raised it by 5 times that amount. They raised it by 50 feet or 15 metres. And that was enough to force the two little legs to become one